Good afternoon, Hymn Society, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you may be. My name is Mike McMahon. I'm Executive Director of the Hymn Society, and I am just really so pleased to welcome you to this featured session by Tom Trenney. If you were with us last night, you got a chance to experience what a wonderful leader Tom is and what a wonderful pastoral minister and musician. Today, he's going to be offering a featured session, and before he does that, I'm very happy to pass this along to Chi Chen Mulbrink, who is a member of our executive committee and who will be introducing Tom. During the session, if you have any questions that come to mind, please write them into the chat box or into the question and answer feature, and we will be monitoring those during the session. And at the end, we'll leave a little time and have a chance to ask some of those questions to Tom. So, Chi, it's all yours.
I should say it's a good afternoon because now it's about noon time. And everyone, my name is Chi Chen Mulbrink, a member of the executive committee of the Hymn Society. We are very glad you are one of our first digital conference on Why We Sing, the song, the singers. This is the time we will focus on today, and through our conversation and through Tom's wonderful words afterwards. And I would love to remind that we are not able to sing or hear, each other, but of course we will see Tom very soon. But may make the comments or asking questions through the chat or the question and answer features. I was on the last night hymn festival. It brought me a lot of tears. In this difficult time, thank you, Tom, for your wonderful pastoral care through the music. Tom Trenney is currently the first Primus Church music director, the director of the Minister of the Music at the First Primus Church, Nebraska. Tom is not only the church musician only, he's really as also the preacher. And even the preaching for from the worship, and he is also the assistant professors of the music and a conductor of chorus at the Nebraska Wesleyan University. And we all know Tom has a wonderful personality through his talking and with the music. And I met Tom from the Presbyterian Association of Musicians conference a few years ago. That was really, benefit for all my soul for the musicianship. And as you know, he's a wonderful parent as well. So let me welcome Tom.
Thank you so much. Wow, I appreciate you, Mike, and Chi, and also behind the scenes, Stephen and Brian, for your help preparing the way for this time together today. It's such a joy to be with all of you. I appreciate so many of you reaching out to me last night and in between. I hope you won't mind my taking the privilege now of gathering us in a brief word of prayer. Let's pray. Speak, Lord, for your servants are listening. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O dear God, our faithful rock and our sure Redeemer. Amen. So good to have this time with you. I'll spend a little time today sharing some of my personal story with you. And I'd just like to say that's not because I think my personal story is any more valuable than anyone else's or especially wonderful, but it's the only one I've got. And I hope that by offering it today, it may encourage you to think about the ways that your unique calling into becoming who you are, into doing the ministry and the service that you've been called to do may help you to remember some of that. And if that happens, then this will have been, from my perspective anyway, time very well spent. I wish I could see and hear all of you in this moment, but I'm grateful that we can stay connected. When I was in my early 20s, I lived in Michigan, in a suburb of Detroit, and my folks came to visit me once over my birthday, and Mom said, I'd like to make some cupcakes. I thought that was a great idea. But many of you know who would know me well. Before I met Brent, anyway, there would be nothing in my kitchen that would be useful to bake anything. So my mom gave me a very detailed list of things to go and buy at the grocery store. And so I went dutifully and I got all the things on the list. And then the last thing was, seemed like the simplest cupcake mix, it said. So I walked down the baking aisle. I don't think I'd ever been in that aisle before. I remember very clearly it was aisle 11 at Kroger's. And I looked all the way on the side of one of the shelves over on this side to my left, and there were all kinds of beautiful cover models of cakes. There was vanilla cake and chocolate cake and devil's food cake and marble cake and confetti cake. I mean, just I didn't even know there were that many kinds of cakes. And I got all the way to the bottom and I thought, no cupcake mix here. And so I turned my head to the other side of the aisle and I saw all of these different muffin mixes. And there were blueberry muffins and cranberry muffins and bran muffins and apple muffins and banana. I mean, just so many. And yet I didn't see any cupcakes there either. And I thought, maybe there's some kind of cupcake special and they're on one of the side aisles. So I started to walk around the aisle and I saw one of those men wearing an apron with the store logo on it. And he asked me that fateful question that we so often hear: have you found everything you're looking for? A few minutes later, I learned that you can make cupcakes with cake mix. I share that because it's an absolutely true story. And because I think it shows us all an example of how sometimes we think we're looking for something so specific that we fail to see the possibilities that are right before our eyes in abundance. I think that happens to us all too often. And I think it does not only for simple things like cupcake mix, but also for big things like our purpose and our calling and our mission. And so I want you to think today as we go through this time together of all of the possibilities, even in this difficult moment, that may well be within your grasp, rather than suffering for the specific things you may be envisioning that you can't touch or taste or see or feel quite right in this moment right now. When I finished grad school, it's been almost 20 years ago, I guess. I remember, I was one of those students that pretty much did everything my teachers told me to do. I was one of those kids that pretty much did everything my parents told me to do. And so, I had done my part, done the hard work I felt I was supposed to do, felt I had checked all of the boxes of achievement, and I had entered the competitions I was supposed to, and I was ready. And I remember thinking, whatever church gets me is going to be so lucky. And I got to begin my journey working in full-time ministry. And I remember being so frustrated so often. I remember thinking things all the time like, if only we had the money to get the organ tuned. If only the pastors would tell me before Friday what the hymns are going to be for Sunday. If only Nancy would have shown up to bell practice this week. If only we had a few sopranos that were under 65. The list goes on and on. If only, if only, if only. Every Sunday I was evaluating what was happening through the filter of that boy who did everything he was told to do and thought that if you did that, you were achieving what you were supposed to do and becoming who you were supposed to be. But it was in the dusty, dingy choir room in that church. It was a repurposed Sunday school room. The chalkboard was real close to the ground. You had to kind of kneel down to get a drink out of the drinking fountain. There were really ugly green folding chairs the choir sat on, a vicious upright piano, blonde, of course, curtains that reminded me of the ones on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And golly, in spite of that, I started to get to know the people that came into that room and spent Thursday nights with me. And I started to know what they were coming to choir from and what they were going home to. I learned that they were coming from treatment for cancer, that they were coming from caring for an aging parent who was suffering from dementia. I learned that they were coming from dropping off their kids for soccer practice and picking them up from a friend's house and trying to get them to do their homework. And as I got to know the stories of these dear people, it started to change my whole heart and mind about what it was that we were doing together and what success and achievement actually might have been in the context of ministry. I'm pretty confident that I came to serve in the church because I was a musician who felt called to make music. But I think now I feel a calling to do ministry, and I just happen to be a musician. Maybe that's happened for you too in your own unique way. Some of you will already know my spiritual superhero is Fred Rogers. I've even I even changed my shoes a lot as an organist, and you almost never see me without a coat or a sweater, but that's by coincidence mostly. But it's no coincidence, I think, that when Fred Rogers graduated from college as a music major, he was pondering going to seminary, and he came home from college that summer, and his parents had a television in their home, and of course that would have been new at the time, not so long ago. I think it's really interesting that when Fred first saw the television in his parents' house, he saw that there were programs for children, supposedly, and what he saw was people throwing pies in one another's faces and pushing one another down the stairs, kind of ridiculing and laughing at one another. And he absolutely hated what he saw. And he had this idea in watching that, he had this vision in that moment that maybe that space between the television set and the child could become holy ground. Wow. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. You know, in our normal lives, we can think of the space between the organist and the congregation, the space between the choir director and the choir, the space between the preacher and the pew, and now the space between the worship leader and the computer screen. How can that become holy ground? And can that be true also for the people in our choir who may go to be the bank teller and to serve the customer, and the teacher to serve the student, and the doctor to serve the patient? One thing that remains constant, except for once every 4 years, is that we get 168 hours each week. And the question really becomes for each of us, how do we choose to spend that time? And whom do we choose to invest that time in? I want to share, kind of to continue the on-ramp to this conversation, a reflection. And if you've ever been with me for a retreat or workshop, you've probably heard this before, but golly, it comes back to my heart again and again. This was sent to me in an email in 2011. Some good things happen in email, my friends. Keep your eyes on your inbox once in a while. this was a reflection from Quinn Caldwell, a pastor now in Syracuse, New York, I believe. I'll share it with you. There are about 5,400 animal species that make complex, intentional, repeatable musical vocalizations. That is, there are about 5,400 species that sing. The majority live in trees. A few live in the oceans. A very few live underground. But there is only one singing species that lives on the ground. Us. Another thing, humans are the only singing species with a precise and shared sense of rhythm. I always insert sometimes here, which is what allows us to sing together. Two birds might sing the same song, but they cannot sing it together. Another thing, if a room full of people sings at the same time, they start to breathe at the same time as well. Some studies suggest that if the drumbeat or bass line is strong enough, their hearts will begin to beat together too. And if we're singing together and breathing together and our hearts are beating together, then it's like we're one body. And you know whose body it is. Another thing, all the other species stop singing when danger approaches. But humans sing louder the closer the danger gets. We sing together and we become large and we do not back down. So come racism and we shall overcome you. Come fear, for it is well with my soul. Come war, for this is your silent night. Come death, for Jesus Christ is risen today. Come all ye faithful and sing. As I start to think about the miracle and mystery of music as a ministry particularly, I think what an incredible reality of creation, perhaps at least in my way of thinking, the most incredible aspect of God's creation is that each of us is created to be a unique musical instrument. And there's music born in us, not just as a singer, but especially as a singer, because we are literally created to be instruments, right? Handcrafted and fashioned. There's music inside of us that no one else has ever made and that no one else ever could. And this reality, this incredible grace that when we breathe in the gift of life, the breath of life, we can breathe out the gift of music in gratitude and thanks in return. This is such an amazing, simple, but deep reality that I think we need to continually remind one another of. And as we begin to think about music ministry, I want us to think that our voice, our talent, is just the way of getting in to the conversation. It's not the point. One of my mentors, Craig Hella Johnson, I remember being in a workshop with him and his saying to us, one of the hard lessons of life is to realize that your life is really not about you. And what a cleansing grace that is. Having said that, there's also the wonderful privilege that no one else has ever been able to lead the life that you can live and to be able to love and to serve and to give in the way that you can. And so we each bring whatever talent we may have as a singer in the congregation, as a director, as an organist, however you may be entering this conversation, we bring that right away. And that's the place we enter. That's not the goal. It's not about us. It's about what we can give to serve in this ministry. And I want to tell you a quick story. When I was teaching at a small college called Doane College here in Nebraska, my first year I taught them the freshman women's choir. And these were young women who didn't pass the audition to be in the holier choir that wore the blue robes. And a lot of the young women came to class the first day kind of disappointed and discouraged, and they got stuck with me in there. I loved teaching those young women. And that first year, after class the first day, there was a knock on the doors. I hadn't quite left the room yet. And there was a young woman named Summer who poked her head in. And Summer said she'd like to be in the choir, but she hadn't signed up yet. Was it too late? I said, no, come. We'd love to have you join us. I said to her, Summer, why don't you just come to class on Wednesday and we'll be happy to have you. And she said, no, I got to tell you something first. I've never been in a choir before. I said, that's okay. Come along. You don't have to have sung before. And she said, no, well, hang on. My family always made fun of me when I tried to sing at home. And I said, well, that's okay. You come along. Your family's not here now. We want you to be here. We want you to sing with us. And so that first day of class, I put Summer in a spot right between two of the strong singers and women in the group. And I'll be honest, when we started to vocalize that day, I had an idea what her family might have been questioning in their own way. But after class that day, to her credit, Summer came up to me and she said, would you be comfortable if I came to class to just work with you a little bit on Friday before everyone else got there? I would love that, I said. And so we had these beautiful meetings together before class for several weeks. And Summer began to become an important and beautiful part of our choir family. And after we sang our first performance, I brought in a recording of the choir, and I asked the young women to be listening from a way of thinking about how they feel about what they heard, and that we'd have some conversation afterwards. And I remember after they heard themselves sing, I remember how beautifully they sang. It was compelling. There was no reason they should have sounded that beautiful, honestly. I remember Summer being the first one to raise her hand, and she looked at me and she looked around the room, and she said, I can't believe I'm part of something so beautiful. I'll never forget that. She didn't say, listen to how great we are, listen to how good I am. She said, I can't believe I get to be part of something so beautiful. I think it becomes our role as music ministers to try to create a world like that, a space like that, a place to be part of something so beautiful for each person, even the most reluctant singer among us, even the average bear sitting in the pew in our congregation, pardon me. I think that is a high calling for us, to remember that we get to help create a place where everyone gets to be part of music that is so much more beautiful than anything they could be part of, regardless of what voice, what talent they might bring into the conversation. Henry Van Dyke reminded us, the woods would be very silent if no bird sang but the best. I heard a funny story about Carol Burnett once, and she was just trying to break into show business, and she snuck backstage at the Pajama Game, which was on Broadway at the time. And she was trying to kind of wiggle her way in to see one of the directors to see about getting a spot. And she finally got up to speak to one of the assistant directors, and he said, oh, okay, what do you got to tell me? He's like, are you a good dancer? And she said, no, I'm not really that good of a dancer. And he said, are you a good singer? She said, no, I'm not really that good of a singer. And she said, well, how do you expect to get a part in the chorus if you're not a good singer and you're not a good dancer? And she said, I'm not good enough to be in the chorus. I'd need a feature role. I think we all have an understanding of that kind of person too. The person who struggles to become a part of a community. A person who struggles maybe to have the humility and grace, though I'm not saying that in criticism in this particular case of Carol, but just that idea. Someone who struggles to think about how their gifts can empower the community rather than that can maybe lead the community. And I wonder sometimes if we who lead the music in our churches need to look in the mirror and to be sure we're very willing to humble ourselves and to be part of the whole rather than to be the point of it all. Now, the opposite of this is also true. There are some people who come to the music ministry thinking that it should revolve around them. When I was a young church musician, in my first call, I remember the soprano section leader from that congregation, who had been in that role longer than I was old, calling a meeting with me in my office. And I remember how it felt to sit there, and she told me that she hoped I was planning to choose music for the choir to feature her voice. It became very clear to me in that moment that she and I had a very different understanding of what the music ministry was. My understanding was that it was a place for all of us to come together to give, rather than for all of us to come together to lift specific people up. And I think when we instead decide to lift everyone up, to lift the community as a whole up, that can become so much more empowering and so much more healing and so much more whole for so many of us. So when we start to think about using our talent, whatever it is, whether it be as humble as Summer's or as vital to us as Carol's might have been, if we think about how we may offer it, I have a chart that we're going to start sharing gradually here, thanks to my friends working, that we're going to see how we can contribute our talent through the different layers. And these layers will go a lot more quickly than this on-ramp has in our conversation. And the first one that I'd like to share with you is to think about how we might give our particular talent and our voice to the music we make. And as we're going to see a bunch of concentric circles in this chart over time and work our way to the center, even though we're musicians, most of us, music isn't the reason we're there. It's the vehicle. It becomes the instrument. We become servant musicians. We give our talent to the music. And I think we all have heard singers who sing every song, no matter what time it come from, no matter who composed it, no matter what its message was. They sing every song the same as they did the one before. And they almost use the songs themselves, the music, as a vehicle for their voice, rather than using their voice as an instrument through which the music that they're singing might sound. I remember once being on a trip in upstate New York, and so often when I was traveling as an organist, the organists in the town would want to take me to see every instrument in the geographical area. I sometimes would rather have gone to a baseball game or for a swim, but I occasionally would cave in and go on these trips. And there was one time I was really glad I did. It was like the Lord saying, you should do this more often. And so I went to this small church, and the organ technicians were there rebuilding and kind of refashioning an old instrument, a historic instrument. And when we got there, there were pipes spread all over the church, some on the pews, some on the floor, some already back up in the organ case. And I remember the organist playing some of the pipes, and the organ builder, and this is the 8-foot principle. Oh, it's a beautiful sound. Lovely, lovely, lovely. And then came this powerful moment I'll never forget. That there was clearly a whole rank, a whole set of pipes sitting out there on the floor, and the organ builder picked one of them up and had it in his hand, and he said, "We're still trying to figure out what these pipes want to do." Did you hear that? We're still trying to figure out what these pipes want to do. He wasn't saying we're trying to make these pipes do what we want them to do. I sometimes wonder if we need to think more in those ways. How can we allow the authentic, honest voice of the people in our choir and congregation be revealed? How can the uniqueness of their particular way of singing and sharing be freed and be released in communal song? This way of thinking requires, I think, a lot of humility in us. And I think we can misunderstand humility as self-deprecation. And I think we need to have a war against that, frankly. I love this quote of C.S. Lewis. True humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. I'm going to offer that again. True humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. When we start to approach the great gift of music, we get to look at all the treasures of history that we have access to more than anyone else ever has in the history of the world. Think about that. We can use our unique gift in service of all of this different abundant music that's around us, all of the textures and flavors and colors that we can allow our unique sound to paint, to be informed. So here we are as musicians giving our voice to the music, and then comes the next place on our chart. If we start to think about how the music can become a servant to the texts that we sing, I think a lot of us do end up getting this far in the circle most of the time, especially if you're in the hymn society gathering like this. That's to say, how can the music serve the text that it's carrying? How can the words that we're singing into be revealed more passionately and thoughtfully and with more expression and nuance by the music that accompanies it? We'll be listening to a piece of music here. That's a cue for our audiovisual helpers, but not quite yet. I want you to think with me as we listen to this next piece, which it's a familiar song. It's "O Come All Ye Faithful," a carol we all know. I want you to think about how this particular interpretation makes you feel and what it makes you think about. And as we're listening to it, feel free to add something to the chat about it, and to kind of look at one another's responses. And I'd be grateful to have the opportunity to give some of my thoughts. Now I'm gonna say another time, I told you I was telling my story because it's the only one I have. In this case, I'm gonna share some of my own music. And that's not because I think it's better than someone else's. It's because I know then we can't talk behind the composer's back. And I'll be able to tell you what was indeed on my heart, and hopefully that communicates with you, and what I'm hoping might be exegeted in a certain way, or preached in a certain way in the way we've said it. So let's go ahead and listen to a few minutes of this arrangement. You'll see the score for the first part as well, I think.
O come all ye faithful, joyful and triumphant. O come ye to
I love seeing all of your ideas coming in here in the chat. I wish we could have a conversation in real time, but the things you're talking about of reverence and adoration, I want to just say what inspired this piece. And it was, we at First Plymouth, we have, I forget how many it was that year, 7, 8, or 9 Christmas Eve services. And we were in service 7, 8, or 9, one of the last ones, and we were singing "O Come All Ye Faithful." I love "O Come All Ye Faithful." It's one of my favorite carols. The theology is rich and deep and meaningful. It holds great nostalgia for me. But we were pounding through, "Oh, come, let us adore him." And I remember thinking, what were we going to do to that poor baby when we got there? And I thought, I've never actually thought about the words to this hymn before. Even though I love this hymn, and even though it means a lot to me, I never paused and reflected about it. And I think one of the things that's essential for us as we look at music to share in our congregations, and we think about how we're going to play the accompaniments for hymns, for example, or whose arrangements of music we might be using, that we find pieces that the music that people offer or the accompaniments that unfold around actually try to help us experience the text in a particularly meaningful way, that help us understand more deeply what the song is about. And so I hope those few moments of reflection and adoration were helpful to you. It reminded me when I was a little boy I was going to meet my baby cousin, and at that time I hadn't been a lot of little young children before. I was the last in my kind of generation, and this was the first baby, to kind of be in the family. And I remember running to Grandma's house in the door to meet this new baby, and I had a ball tucked under one hand to play with him and a matchbox car in the other. And as I got closer to the room he was in, all the grown-ups around him were standing looking over the bassinet really quietly. And I remember setting down my ball and setting down my car and walking slowly over and looking in. I still had all the joy I had coming in, but the way of embodying it was different. Music can help us to feel those kinds of experiences. Sometimes people say, how do you choose music for your choirs? Well, you've already learned a little bit of that. I look at the texts before I look at the music. And then I look to see if the music helps the text come to life and brings out its meaning. I think that's an important thing for us to continue. Let's get back to our chart now and see where we go from here. As we look at the music and we allow the music to serve the text, the context of the music comes into question. That's to say the bigger picture. Now, let's think about context in many different ways. Those of you who streamed the hymn festival with us last night, some of those hymns would have felt different to you because of the context you were singing in. You were singing in your living room, and you may not, or in your bedroom, and you may not have sung hymns a whole lot in those places before. The context of it would have been different because of what reading was shared right before, or what hymn had come 2 places before. It might have been different because of what you experienced that day. It might have been different because we're in the midst of COVID, and because we're in the midst of a time where so many of the things we feel called to do, we feel we can't do. The context is peculiar and unique to each of us. It might have been because of a phone call you got right before you sang that night. That we each have a personal context that we bring, and where the song is in the worship service. I remember, think how differently it would be to sing Jesus Loves Me immediately after a baptism of a child compared to in the context of a memorial service for a child. Think about how different it would be to sing Jesus Loves Me on the Sunday where all the children of the church get Bibles, compared to the Sunday I remember playing it the Sunday after the attacks of 9/11. That hymn is the same, but its text is the same. The way we play it may be different if we allow the context of the moment we're playing it in, and the context of the community that we're gathered in to inform it. I think that's an important thing for us. Music also has a context in its native origin. That's to say, where did the song come from? I think so often of the times I've been privileged to be with Alice Parker. And those of you who have, I remember, growing up, there was a hymn tempo. I don't know about in your church, but in my church, there was a hymn tempo. And that was pretty much that. All the hymns fit in that same tempo. Here's an example. Praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King of creation. I'm not criticizing you if you do it that way. The Lord knows I've done it that way. But when Alice Parker asked me, have you ever thought about the kind of music you know from that period in time when that song first came into fashion and into being? And she started to sing in her inimitable way, praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King of creation. I started to finally feel some of the joy. I've started to feel some of the soaring of the eagle's wings that song was about to begin with, that I had missed before. Another important context to mention here, the African American spiritual song. I think so often in our choral tradition, we've chosen to use the songs of the African American experience to become closers, to become songs at the end of our concerts, to get standing ovations, to kind of show how great we are. And I think when we do that, we miss the point of this whole circle, and we dishonor the context and the text and the music, frankly, of these beautiful songs. I am not someone who can speak authentically to this other than from my own heart, but I can say that I can't do "Soon We'll Be Done with the Troubles of the World, the Troubles" anymore, even though that's the way I learned this song when I was a young man. But I can sing, soon I will be done with the troubles of the world, the troubles of the world, the troubles of the world. I can't sing, my soul's been anchored in the Lord, my soul's... What's anchored about that? My soul's been anchored in the Lord. My soul's been anchored in the Lord. When we think about the context that these expressions of faith and hope came from the most hopeless circumstances, I think it can change the way that we give our voice to it, the way that our talent is offered to it, the way that we make the music sound, the way that we let the text speak. Context. I remember being at Montreat some years ago. What a special time that was. And being with the adult choir, we were singing Alexander Kopilov's Heavenly Light. And I remember listening to this beautiful choir of people from here and there and everywhere coming together, becoming a choir in an instant. And I thought of this beautiful prayer that we were singing, set to music from Russia. And in those days, there was a lot of news coming out about the Russians interfering with our elections and the Russians trying to destroy our country and the Russians. And I realized that those news bites had started to infect and affect me to think that everyone in that entire country, all the Russians, were out to get me. When really, most of the people there were likely praying that same prayer and singing in their own way that same song I was singing. When we think about context, it can transform our way of facing the challenges of any moment, and it can make the music and the text and the way that we offer our gifts to it that much more meaningful. Getting back to our chart, when we allow our talent to serve the music and the text and the context, we start to create a sense of connection. That's something I think a lot of us could feel even last night when we were separate, that we somehow had a connection together through all of these layers that bind us together in such a way. I've been thinking a lot lately, from God's perspective, there are billions of churches, right? There are millions of denominations, it seems. We all worship in such a fractured way to begin with. From God's perspective, I don't know how different it is for God to know that our congregation's now worshiping in many different homes than it was a few months ago when it felt so differently to us. It's about this bigger sense of connection that we know and feel when we share these things that belong to each and all of us. I want to share with you, this is a very beautiful thing that I discovered in a program for the American Choral Directors Association some years ago. It was a biography for a high school men's chorus. Now, those of you who have been to ACDA or things like that, you'll realize most of the biographies are that this choir has sung on 7 continents, that they've sung for the Pope, and they sang with Robert Shaw. Jesus Christ was a guest conductor at their latest festival. Like, it goes on and on about lifting up these and sort of fluffing up the feathers, and that's all well and good. But this is the biography we read about the Appleton North High School Choir. At 11:25 every school day at Appleton North High School, 65 young men walk into the choir room. They stop here between 4th and 6th hour. They stop between football practice and driver's ed, between honors band and theater rehearsal, between wrestling and baseball, between forensics and student council, between trying to fit in and trying to break out, between falling in love and feeling alone, between a GPA and an ACT, between a tough math test and tough conversations with dad, between taking care of a younger sister and trying to be like an older brother, between boyhood and manhood, they stop here. There's physicality to their entrance, different than the mixed choir or the women's choir. You can actually feel the vibrations, the footsteps, the smiles, the jokes, the she said, what? The shoves, the slaps on the back, every day a 3-minute frat party. Then the bell, a shift, an invitation. Find your place. Take a breath. Slow down. Open your eyes. Open your heart. Listen. Enter in. In our culture, in our schools, young men get the message: be strong, be loud, be first, compete, accumulate, dominate, think, don't feel, go it alone, have no fear, keep going because you're not quite there. They learn the rules. At 11:25 in this room, they're invited to step out of the game. For the next 50 minutes, they don't need anything they don't already have. They're asked to slow down, to really see and hear the others in the room. In that space, they can feel who and what they are at their core, and they quickly come to know that here, they're all the same. From that core comes the music. They're asked to remove themselves from center stage and place someone else or something else there. They're encouraged to go inside and do some work, and when they emerge, they're more sensitive, more expressive, more empathetic, more aware, more appreciative, gentler, and stronger. And on to the 6th hour. Wow. That's a teacher in a community that really gets what's possible. That music can become a ministry even in a context like a school, can't it? Just as the television could become ministry between Mr. Rogers and the child. And just as everything that we do in this moment and every moment can become ministry between us and the people we're privileged to walk beside. Before we wrap this up and talk about the last bit of our circle, I want to remind you that the time you spend with your choir, probably even in these virtual days, may well be the only time in their week that they're invited to breathe deeply. It may well be the only time of the week that they're asked to think about their posture and the way that they carry their body. It may be the only time in the week they're asked to listen intently to their neighbors while also offering the best gifts from within themselves. It may well be the only time during their week that they think about poetry. It may well be the only time that scripture finds its way on their lips. It may well be the only time that they say a prayer out loud. It may well be the only time they think about something that happened in the world before they were born. It's a deep, deep privilege to walk on this holy ground that we walk upon. And as we look back to the final layer of the chart, I think all of that coming together and getting into this musical thing to begin with is to lift up some sort of message. And I'm not a good enough teacher not to tell you that you've got to figure out what that is for you personally, because you have a message in your heart and in your soul that I can't begin to know. Maybe it's peace, maybe it's hope, maybe it's love, maybe it's light, maybe it's joy. But as you saw from that arrow on the chart, what helps us get from the place of our own talent to being able to gather in community and to lift up some sort of message bigger than us, greater than us, more compelling than us, is our discipline. And I don't mean discipline the way my 4th grade teacher meant, which was punishment. I mean discipline in the way of the joy that comes from following goodness, of the hope that comes from following love, of the grace and light that come even in difficult moments from following Jesus. How special it's been to share some of these ideas with you. And I pray that this time together may open your mind and heart to know how important it is for you to do the work that you're doing and to serve the community that you're serving. I look forward to answering, or at least attempting to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Tom. We don't really have very many questions. I think people were so taken with the presentation and so entered into it so deeply, as we can see from the things that people have been entering into the chat. But there are 2 specific questions that I think you can answer pretty easily. The first one was from David and Joe. They were wondering, who publishes your arrangement of O Come All Ye Faithful?
Oh, thank you. That's published by Mark Foster. So one of the Hal Leonard companies. Great,
thank you. And from Jane, she would love if we could have that Appleton Choir statement. Is there some way you can send that to me as a
sure.
a text?
I can send PDF maybe, and then you could share it. I
Absolutely.
should say the conductor of that choir at the time was Craig Ahmet, and so just such an inspiration, I think.
Great. And so there was something that you said earlier on that sort of grabbed me, and I was wondering if you might elaborate on that. And those are the elements of the unexpected and connection to mystery. I wonder if you could say a little bit about the ministry of the musician with respect to exposing people to something that's unexpected and allowing them to enter into the mystery. Yeah.
Well, as I often answer questions with stories, maybe it's a parable in a way, I don't know, but I remember, for example, one Sunday after worship, we had sung, honestly, I can't remember if it was Lord of the Dance or Let All Things Now Living or All Things Bright and Beautiful. Those are 3 hymns I often invite people to whistle along if they want to in the congregation. And anyway, after the service, this one woman came up to me. I knew her from just seeing her in the church, but I had never spent any time with her before. She kind of grabbed me forcefully by the arms. You could do that in those days. You could get close to people. I really missed that. And she said, I just need to tell you, this morning was the first time I've ever heard my husband make music in worship. And she said, he doesn't like to sing, but he was whistling with me when we were singing that opening hymn. And I think that's an example. We sometimes think of mystery as being something kind of elusive and, you know, smoke and mirrors and incense and all of those sorts of things. And I'm not saying those aren't, but I think mystery can come to us in playful and simple ways too, you know, and it's so important for us to think about ways that we can create all kinds of access places for people to enter this realm in a way that's comfortable to them, so that they can be inspired to want to learn more about the depth and layers that we've come to know and love, rather than expecting them to go there right away and being frustrated.
Well, Tom, thank you so much. We're just about out of time, but before we go, I just want to remind all of our participants that this evening's festival is with Kim Harris, African American Traditions, and please invite your friends. Now, don't share your Zoom link with them, but do please share the YouTube link with them, or Facebook. Tell them to find us on Facebook, and they can join us for that. Full conference registrants also, we have a 2:30 breakout conversation on best practices in digital worship, and it's a pretty timely topic for us right now. So thank you so much, Tom, for being with us this week. I just want to say that there's a sense of beauty that you bring to this that I think we all appreciate so much. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bless you all.
Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you at the next thing. Take care. Bye-bye.